The century, man. The century wasn't too bad, right?
Yeah, but
This time here, though, it's all better.
had a really good sound, really good. Is this a documentary then?
We're going to hit you with as many songs as we possibly can in 1 hour tonight. So I hope you're as fucked as we are.
A full front for one tries to drag you down. One every man has to war. Which is so ass more than anywhere to ground. But to look all black, cause it's so hardcore. Ask yourself, why do we do these things to ourselves? Cause it don't make sense. Are we here to live or are we here to die? It's got the time to fly beyond and back. Beyond and back. Beyond and back. You don't look back. Beyond and back.
The scene in Adelaide at the time, and you're talking like late 80s into the early 90s. I mean, Adelaide's still an isolated city. You look at what's happening on the East Coast, and we've always sort of had to punch above our weight to even like get noticed and recognised if you're a band. I've learned a lot about the thrash metal history in Australia, and Adelaide. I think a lot of the bands that we know of in Adelaide might not have had the same impact in other states, but in terms of the quality that we had going on here, it was pretty remarkable. Sudafed were a band, like they were sort of the key bands of the era. And they kind of established the South Australian thrash metal scene at the time, involving themselves in a lot of lineups and really sort of pushing the scene along.
They were like speed metal, but their singer was a punk singer, Mark Hayes. He was from a band called Perdition, and he kind of had that real punk sound, like Johnny Rotten sort of singing.
Beyond the back, beyond the back, beyond the back, beyond the back.
You're going to have a good time tonight, I can feel it.
Right, Sudafed formed from previous bands, Mark from Position, and a band called Delusion, which Adam and Pete were in, and then Anthony James came into the fore as well, and they formed the nucleus of Sudafed. That was in the late 86. They needed a bass player, and my brother Mark asked me if I wanted to jump in, and within about 3 to 4 months we were out playing. We played some big shows and got some big supports with bands like Mortal Sin and Nothing Sacred, Melbourne. Yeah, things took off really quick. The thrash scene just thrived in Adelaide. We were sort of at the forefront of it all and just riding high on the wave, you know.
Adelaide's always had it pretty decent. Even back in the day when thrash was first taking off, Adelaide's had some really good thrash bands. There was a band called Berserker, and they were really good. I think South Australia, Adelaide's always had a good kind of scene for that kind of style.
I just finished school and I wanted to get into a band as fast as possible, like a proper band. And so I saw an advert for a band called Final Warning wanting a guitarist, and so I went and auditioned, and they were terrible. They were absolutely terrible. And they actually asked me the day that I auditioned and said, will you wear spandex? And I'm just like, no, I won't wear it. And they were on the power metal side of things. But once I joined, I kind of exerted my influence. We started doing some Metallica and Stormtroopers of Death, started changing members, writing our own stuff, and changed the name quite quickly as well. Went from Final Warning to Berserker once we got the new singer. His name was Patrick, and he had a kind of like Joey Belladonna type thing going. You know, he was quite a clean singer. But yeah, that's how we got together. Basically, I joined the band and sacked everyone. At the time Berserker started, I called them the Big Three. Well, we had the Big Three thrash bands in Adelaide, and there was Sudafed, and then there was another one called Epidemic. They were like technical metal.
They were the new kids on the block, and they had a really intense sound and original style, you know. Darren used to sing pretty high, and it was a ball of energy while performing. They were to complete the Big Three in Adelaide, which was Sudafed, Berserker and Epidemic at the time. We were all really good friends and worked well with great songwriting.
And so we always saw each other. We sort of like were rivals, but friends as well, you know. And all three bands, we'd do gigs quite often. It kind of spurred us on. And all three bands got really, really good quite quickly. And then there was a few more bands started popping up in, I'd say, 88. We had Outrage come down from Port Pirie, a town outside of Adelaide. They were like absolute shredders, unbelievable guitar players. And then Inflictor that were very good as well. And then a bit later, of course, we had Truth Corroded. They were at school. And I actually came into their high school music class for a few sessions and talked about modern music and how to get a band together and how to, you know, just how to do it.
It was my high school band, which were pretty terrible. Our school thought were pretty cool, so they decided they wanted to do some music mentorship. And I had met Michael when I was doing work experience in high school. I was kind of like, I sort of said to our music teacher, I've got just the guy. So I contacted Michael and said, hey, would you be keen in big? You know, it was kind of like having Michael from Berserker actually, you know, helping us out was a pretty big deal. So Michael approached it, you know, to his credit, he approached it with the professionalism that was required for such a responsibility. As for my band, maybe not so. Sort of rocked up, and you know we had a carton of beer there, and we were like all at the school's expense as well. So, so he was just kind of shaking his head, going, "Oh fuck."
My favourite genre of thrash is a genre inside thrash. I was always a big fan of the Bay Area thrash scene, so I always likened what I saw as the bigger bands in the Adelaide thrash scenes, like towards the Bay Area stuff. It just had a really good vibe, and growing up, you'd read all the magazines and hear about all these big parties everyone had, and Adelaide kind of had that vibe. There was the Berserker guys, well, Michael Heslop from Berserker had a house, and everyone would go to this house and just party and see bands like Inflictor would play in the backyard, and there'd be like, you know, 150 people there, just pretty much just causing chaos and just going crazy. It just had a really good vibe. It was a real party.
That period was really, really healthy. I mean, we were having crowds of, you know, sometimes 300-400 at our shows, and that's a lot for Adelaide, you know, for local bands. So yeah, it was really healthy. It was a good time. It felt like we were part of something.
I'm really stoked that, you know, we were kids of the 80s, so to speak, and got to experience that.
The Canberra scene was really, really, really strong, and as a 17-year-old kid, the three best bands in the world were Slayer, Metallica and Armored Angel.
First off, Armored Angel, they blew me away. Everybody else, yeah, they sounded like stuff you've heard before. Armored Angel, that was next level stuff, dude. As a 14-year-old, that's like, holy shit, look at those guys, man. They were the heaviest, tightest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, they got a lot of interest from all around the world for their demos. Lots of record labels wanting to sign them. Lots of opportunities to perform. When we go and see international bands like, Bolt Thrower, they would get the national support, and it was just, they really helped to bring that scene, build that scene down there, but also in Australia because they were so freaking good. Well, look, there was a few different incarnations of Armored Angel. There was an early incarnation started by their bass player, Lucy, but they were good. They were like sort of more heavy metal, I suppose. Well, most people who always sort of, when they refer to Armored Angel as the three-piece with Lucy and the two Green brothers.
Armored Angel did a demo in 1985 called Baptism in Blood. So I was 15 at that time and used to sort of go into Impact Records and listen to that. So I was kind of really into what the band was doing. I was sort of excited. There was a metal band coming into Canberra. And Lucy had just finished up with the other members of Armored Angel. She wanted to go in a more sort of thrash kind of direction. So Lucy asked Matt and I to join. I joined straight away. Matt was a bit unsure at first because he hadn't been playing guitar long.
And they were interesting as well because Joel, like the drummer, he was also the lead vocalist. So you had, this really interesting visual thing going on as well. This guy behind the kit, smashing the hell out of the kit, but also providing this really gnarly vocal presence. And the scene really grew from those early days of particularly Armored Angel. I mean, going to see Armored Angel was like going to see Metallica. There were a few others as well. There was a band called Precursor. And then another band called Exceed, I think it was. These gigs in Canberra will pull 400, 500, 600, 700 people.
So Canberra's an unusual place. There's no real pubs. Well, at the time, there wasn't really pubs in Canberra. It was more like football clubs or social clubs. So what it was is it was just very difficult to get gigs. Definitely Luce is involved with setting up gigs, and there's also Impact Records. So my brother Matt and Luce were both working at Impact Records, and because their boss allowed them to order whatever stock they wanted, Canberra was getting everything as it was happening. So young kids were in the metal would come into Impact, they were getting really good guidance on the best stuff and the most current stuff that was happening. So in 1986, Lucy put together a thing called the Heavy Metal Holocaust, and under oath I played in that with the first band on, and then Armored Angel, the headline. And there was about 600 or 700 people turned up to that show. So what it showed us is there was people interested in, you just couldn't play it in pubs. So I think that's why Canberra just ended up sort of punching above its weight a little bit, for its size as well.
So you had Canberra, this place which has sort of got a reputation for roundabouts and porn and fireworks and being the capital of public servants, but it had this really great bubbling underground thrash metal scene. And then, we got further out, we started playing in Brisbane and making friends with a whole host of other great Queensland bands.
Iron Lightning were probably the most, they came at more of a commercial kind of thrash kind of side. Yeah, kind of Megadeth kind of vibe, I guess. We're one of the bigger bands in that genre back in the day.
We're at school, and Iron Lightning was pretty much one of our favourite bands we used to get into. And when Wayne left school and joined the band, basically we went to the gigs. I was about 16, you could get in and drink. So that was the good thing with that. It was a shame really when they had a whole album recorded and on the verge of releasing it, sort of when they came apart, unfortunately. But no, there's still some good music there if you find it.
I
pretty much remember the days just with, say, Spitfire mainly.
Oh yeah,
they were a good Brisbane thrash band.
Every time the Iron Lightning and Spitfire had a show on, it was a must-see. Those guys just were phenomenal, and they never played a bad gig.
Some of the other bands, Spitfire, I remember them because they played Anthrax, and I thought that was so impressive because, wow, they play Anthrax, how good must you be? You know, we were young and infantile.
AIM were pretty huge in the hardcore punk crossover kind of scene, with a bit of a metal edge as well.
Anger in Motion. Holy hell. Now that's punk, guys. Marky Hardcore. I used to go to those gigs and watch him to see if his head's going to explode this week. And fast. Holy hell, this guy could spit words, man. Huge influence on myself, I have to say. Yeah, find the early demos and then think live they were even faster. Yeah, man, blast words. What are Dream Killers? They were the biggest mosh pit. The biggest mosh pits, man. It was heavy, it was hell mosh pits. Yeah, man, that's where I lost half my tooth. Their gigs, everybody went. So you had punks. So you've got long hairs diving on top of mohawks, diving on top of no hairs, and dreadlocks, and balcony dives. Because everybody liked them. They were heavy as fuck. But yeah, we had a lot of bands like that. All the gigs were crossovers still at the time because we didn't have enough metal bands to create a whole metal scene.
Brisbane had a thriving underground punk and alternative rock scene throughout the 70s and the 80s. Metal didn't really arrive in Brisbane until much later. During the very conservative government of that time, there were a lot of punk and rock shows getting shut down by police.
Our political situation back in the 80s, it was fucked, man.
That was still when Sir Joe was in power.
And if you look it up, when the punk bands came here to Brisbane, the cops raided those shows, tried to stop it. There were riots. It made England punk scene look like a fashion show, which it really was, man. If you were anything alternative, you were a target. You know, t-shirts got banned from shopping centres, mohawks, black shirts banned from the Maya Centre, which is a huge shopping centre in the middle of Brisbane City. And we had protests at gigs, so the political environment, it was shit. To this day, Cannibal Corpse is still banned from shops, but they sell them anyway.
3 steps into the Queen Street Mall, you were prepared to get 6 police officers, basically like the Gestapo, asking you where your papers and all that sort of thing. But there was that community where we were basically, it was us against them.
You take a look back at Brisbane in the 1980s and you can see why the political climate of the time inspired such a hotbed of extreme underground music, whether it be punk rock, hardcore, and then eventually thrash and death metal.
Middle Over Brisbane was a promotion, I believe, if I remember correctly, run by Ian Bush. That primarily it was a community for Brisbane metalheads.
He was one of the main promoters for the metal scene back in the late 80s, early 90s. He did a really good job of bringing up bands and putting on gigs and whatnot.
Back then, things were very different to what they are now. You know, compared to Melbourne, we are so far behind. There weren't a lot of bands around, to be honest. Bands came and went quite quickly, really, because most of them didn't really make large inroads overall. Back in those days, there's very few gigs for any metal, hard rock bands even. You know, it just wasn't around. Like, you probably had Triple Z around, but they weren't very metal friendly back in those days, that's for sure. You know, we didn't even get gigs in any of their venues or something like that. So virtually, you had to start from your very beginning and organise it yourself. That's how it came about.
I moved up here at the January 1988. The first gig I went to, and it's roughly, it would have been around May, it was my very first gig that I went to for Metal Over Brisbane, was at Chalky Leagues Club. They'd have a few bands there that, quite frankly, you would never think would do a show together. You know, a glam band and a thrash band together. But in Brisbane, that's how they did it. I know for a fact in Sydney they rarely did things like that because the glamours and the thrashers hated each other.
We call them heavy metal holocaust for each gig we put on. So from the fifth one onwards, they all basically held at Sherwood Footy Club, and that sort of became the venue that everyone knew about.
It blew me away, the amount of people that were there. It felt like there was about 300.
There's a good venue in the way that they weren't strict on underages getting in. The club liked us because there was a good drinking crowd. There's very little trouble overall.
My first drinking experience, and I ended up getting grounded because I snuck out of the house to go to it. But I had the time of my life, and it was from that moment on that it was just like, yeah, this is where I want to be. Everybody had a little membership card. You not only had your discounts on the door for all of the Metal Over Brisbane gigs, but you had a sense of belonging, like, you know, we're the Brisbane metalheads.
Gone to my first gig maybe 86, 87 here, which was one of the Metal Over Brisbane gigs. And these gigs were actually huge, man. These gigs were pulling 200 to 300 kids. And this was my first introduction to real metalheads again. I hadn't seen a battle jacket since I left Holland. And boom, there they were.
I guess we helped, but even when it started, it wasn't done for money. It was done for love of metal, full stop.
Great vibe, great people, and I made a lot of friends there over the years. A few of them I still talk to nowadays.
And then after Sir Joe's reign ended in the late 80s, the disruptions towards Brisbane's live music scene began to decrease. Apparently one of the later premiers of Queensland, Wayne Goss, was a bit of an old school metal fan.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Western Queensland, a place called Charleville. So April that year was a major flood where just about the entire town was wiped out. So I was actually out there when it happened, got out of the town as quick as I could, got back into Brisbane and rang Bushy and said, would he be interested in organising a flood relief concert for the money to go to help the victims, you know, out in those parts. So Bushy and another guy by the name of Jeff Allingham, he threw his hat in the ring as well, and we had that at the QUT Refectory at Gardens Point campus. It was a massive success. Overall, we raised probably over 5,000. 30 years ago, that was a lot of money, and I think just over 2,000 had to go to the PA. After that, it was myself and Mouse, who was the bass player in Iron Lightning. We were invited to present the cheque of the funds we raised, which was just over 3,000 from memory, to the premier of the time, Wayne Goss. So we actually got to go up in his office. He was a bit of a metal fan. He actually admitted when we were up there. So he was more of the Sabbath and, you know, Deep Purple, Zeppelin, all that. So, you know, he was pretty grateful, long-haired hooligans like us, I guess, if you want to say, took the time to make the money to go to a good cause.
Perth, Allegiance, you know, like Perth was like another country, and you had Allegiance who were over there pulling, you know, massive crowds.
They were like the Mortal Sin in WA. There, well, Mortal Sin was huge over the eastern seaboard. Allegiance was the same over here. Yeah, that's such a great band. Really good reputation, really good name.
There's another band that I think you must have to include when you're talking about the Australian thrash metal scene, because they were enormous as well.
88 and 89 in Perth was very much a predominantly cover band scene back then, being quite an isolated city. But the very first, I guess, thrash or speed metal bands were coming up sort of happened in the very late 80s. So the first one that came to mind for me was Cremator, and they put out an EP earlier on in the piece. They had a drummer, Russell, who went on to play in UMI of all bands. The way to get the best gigs back then was cover bands. It was very hard for original bands to play a lot of the main venues. It was a very cover band dominated scene. So we all came from cover bands. We started doing our own material, supporting our own cover bands. That's how we sort of started from there, incorporating more and more of our own originals and splintered off into our own band called Allegiance. So then we put our first demo out about 1991, I think, Make the Pledge it was called. And things just sort of grew from there. We sort of started building up our own following, doing our own headlining shows, and other bands were starting to pop up around that time as well. And different bands would get together and do different theme nights. And some of the local bands at the scene at the time, there was like SFD and Rothgar, Vanadium, and all these kind of bands that were all springing up. So we started doing shows with, 3 or 4 bands on the bill and making sort of events out of them, metal events, and using the usual promotion strategies pre-internet back in the time, and just built the scene up from there. So initially it was getting your foot in the door and getting people to take you seriously, want to book shows. Eventually, after you get a bit of name for yourself and put some recordings out, more people wanted to book us and things like that. And this is also around the time when some of the international touring bands were really starting to hit Perth as well. So we got a lot of the early tours coming through, the extreme metal bands, and also later on we pushed it out to do national tours and things like that. There wasn't really any Perth bands doing that back then, touring a very, very local-centric scene. The first album we did, we went number 1 on the charts. So yeah, that was on the mainstream chart. I think it was there for a few weeks. And that was without any radio play, because the radio wouldn't play us. We're too heavy for any of that. So what it does do is open up doors, and that was sort of a bit of a spearhead that helped propel the local scene as well, So it was all good, yeah. So it was good. It was good to see. It was sort of seen it from the very grassroots, from the ground up, and just seen it grow within a period of a few years into a really thriving scene. I guess it was the right timing, and also the right amount of bands and the right sort of promotion and marketing, everything else that goes along with being in a band. So, it was just sort of a slow, sort of steady grind and a lot of effort and focus and to make it all happen. Good times, yeah.